In the opulent gardens of a Napa Valley estate, a tech entrepreneur was about to discover the true cost of family loyalty. What started as a wedding reception took a shocking turn when they came face to face with relatives placing bets on their marriage's failure. Madison Wells wasn't your typical Silicon Valley heiress. For years, she had built a multi-million-dollar company known for strategic brilliance. When she encountered her family's cruel wagering, she had no idea she was walking into psychological warfare. Madison's response? A $10 million trust fund rewarding accurate marriage predictions would transform wedding cruelty into devastating consequences no one could afford. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne bubbles caught the late afternoon light streaming through the glass walls of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, casting prismatic reflections across Madison Wells's ivory silk dress. She should have been radiant. Instead, she felt like she was drowning in crystal and conversation. "Madison, darling, you look absolutely luminous," her cousin Vivian gushed, air-kissing both cheeks with practiced precision. "Though I have to say, the venue is quite unconventional for a Wells wedding." Madison's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her champagne flute. "Ryan and I wanted something that represented us both. Art has always been important to our relationship." Vivian's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked toward the corner where Ryan stood surrounded by a small group of his artist friends, their vintage suits and earnest conversations a stark contrast to the Wells family's polished uniformity. How wonderfully authentic. The word hung in the air like incense, sweet on the surface, but carrying undertones Madison had learned to recognize. Authentic meant different. Different meant lesser. Lesser meant temporary. "If you'll excuse me," Madison said, her voice carrying the crystalline politeness she'd perfected in 28 years of family gatherings, "I should check on the photographer." She moved through the reception with practiced grace, accepting congratulations and deflecting questions about honeymoon plans with the skill of someone who'd grown up in the public eye. But her true destination wasn't the photographer. The museum's acoustics carried voices in unexpected ways, and she'd noticed her family clustering near the Rothko installation, far enough from Ryan's friends to speak freely. Madison positioned herself behind a marble pillar, close enough to hear, but hidden from view. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was hiding at her own wedding reception. 6 months, maximum. The novelty will wear off once she realizes what she's actually gotten herself into. "Mother, that's rather harsh, don't you think?" Bradley's voice carried his characteristic nervous edge. "They seem genuinely happy." "Happiness is a luxury, Bradley, one that rarely survives practical considerations." Patricia's tone brooked no argument. "He's a lovely boy, I'm sure, but he has no idea what it means to be part of this family, the expectations, the responsibilities, the scrutiny. It will crush him, and Madison will resent him for not being strong enough to withstand it." "I think you're underestimating them both," came Aunt Caroline's voice, warm with wine and defiance. "Some people marry for love and make it work." A chorus of polite laughter followed the statement, the kind reserved for endearing but naive sentiments. "Caroline, dear, you've always been a romantic. It's charming, truly. But Madison has responsibilities beyond her personal happiness. This experiment will run its course, and then she can make a more suitable choice." "Experiment?" Bradley's voice cracked slightly. "You're talking about our sister's marriage like it's a failed business venture." "Isn't it?" The new voice belonged to Uncle Richard, Patricia's brother and a venture capitalist who spoke in ROI calculations. "Look at the fundamentals. Different backgrounds, different expectations, different financial situations. The metrics don't support long-term viability." Madison's knuckles had gone white around her champagne flute. She forced herself to breathe, to listen, to gather intelligence the way she did in business negotiations. "So, what are we thinking?" Richard continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when discussing investment portfolios. 6 months? A year? 6 months, Patricia said firmly, once the novelty wears off and reality sets in. "I'll take 2 years," Bradley offered quietly. "Maybe they'll surprise us." Optimistic, Richard chuckled. I'm with Patricia. 6 months, but I'll go 8 to be generous. 18 months, came another voice, Madison recognized. Long enough for her to get pregnant and complicate things, but not long enough for it to become truly entrenched. I think you're all horrible, Caroline declared, but her voice lacked real anger. She sounded tired, defeated. Fine, if we're doing this, I say forever. Some people do find their person, you know? The laughter that followed was gentler this time, indulgent. Caroline was the family eccentric, tolerated for her artistic sensibilities, and forgiven her romantic notions. Forever it is, though I think you'll be disappointed, Caroline. Still, someone should take the long odds. Madison heard the distinctive clink of glasses. They were actually toasting her marriage's demise. The sound hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her vision blur momentarily. These were the people who had raised her, who claimed to love her, who professed concern for her happiness. She straightened slowly, her business mind already working despite the emotional earthquake happening in her chest. There was a pattern here, a system.
They'd turned her marriage into a portfolio, complete with risk assessments and projected returns. The realization brought clarity instead of tears. She knew how to work within systems. Madison emerged from behind the pillar with renewed purpose, her expression serene despite the storm building behind her. She moved through the reception like she was gliding on rails, accepting more congratulations, posing for photographs, playing the role of the radiant bride while her mind worked through scenarios and calculations. Ryan appeared at her elbow during a brief lull, his presence immediately grounding her. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his artist's intuition picking up on tensions others missed. "You seem different." She looked up at him, really looked. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the San Francisco wind, his eyes warm with genuine concern and love. He'd worn his best suit, the one he'd bought specifically for this day, and she could see the small imperfections that marked it as off the rack rather than bespoke. Her family had noticed those imperfections too. "Just overwhelmed," she said, touching his cheek. "It's a lot." He nodded, understanding in the way that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Your family's intense. That's one word for it." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture that was both genuine affection and calculated performance. "Let them see how happy we are," she thought. "Let them underestimate what we're capable of." As the evening progressed, Madison found herself studying her family with new eyes. Bradley's nervous energy, the way he avoided direct eye contact when discussing finances, Patricia's calculated warmth deployed like a weapon when she needed to control a situation, Uncle Richard's casual cruelty disguised as business acumen. They were all so certain of their predictions, so confident in their understanding of human nature and market forces. They had no idea they were about to become part of a much larger experiment. The reception wound down with traditional fanfare, bouquet tossing, final toasts, tearful goodbyes that felt hollow now that Madison understood their true nature. As guests began departing, she spotted Theodore Blackwood near the coat check, his distinguished gray hair and conservative suit making him look like the steadfast family retainer he'd been for decades. Madison approached him with the same casual confidence she'd used to discuss quarterly projections. "Theodore, could I have a word? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, a financial matter." His eyebrows rose slightly. Theodore had been managing Wells family investments since before Madison was born, and he'd never known her to be anything but straightforward in business dealings. "Of course, Madison. Congratulations again, by the way. You and Ryan make a lovely couple." Unlike her family's compliments, his felt genuine. Theodore had always treated her ideas with respect, even when she was a teenager, with grand schemes and limited understanding of market realities. "Thank you," she said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I have a proposition, something unconventional, but potentially quite interesting from a psychological standpoint." Theodore's expression grew intrigued despite himself. "I'm listening." Madison smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached her eyes. How familiar are you with behavioral economics, Theodora? Specifically, the way financial incentives can alter human behavior in measurable ways. Somewhat familiar, he replied carefully, though I suspect you're about to educate me further. Indeed, I am. Madison's voice carried the quiet confidence that had built her app company from a Stanford dorm room idea into a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I want to establish a trust fund, $10 million, with a very specific and unusual distribution structure. Theodore's professional composure never wavered, but Madison caught the slight widening of his eyes. I see. And the beneficiaries? My family, Madison simply said. All of them, based on the accuracy of certain predictions they've made regarding my marriage. She watched understanding Don and Theodore's expression, followed quickly by concern, but his professional training kicked in, and he nodded slowly. This is quite irregular, Madison. I'd need to understand the full scope before— Correct, she interrupted gently. I wouldn't expect you to proceed without complete information. Perhaps we could meet in your office next week. I have some very detailed specifications to discuss. Theodore studied her face, and Madison knew he was seeing something new there, a hardness that hadn't existed before today, tempered by an intelligence that had always been present, but never quite so focused. Very well, then, he said finally. Tuesday morning. Perfect. Madison extended her hand and they shook on it, with the formality of a business transaction, which, Madison supposed, was exactly what it was. As Theodore disappeared into the San Francisco evening, Madison turned back toward the reception hall, where Ryan waited, probably wondering where his new wife had vanished to. The champagne bubbles had long since gone flat in abandoned glasses, and the museum's lights cast everything in sharp relief: art and shadow, beauty and truth, love and calculation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They'd turned her marriage into a portfolio, complete with risk assessments and projected returns. The realization brought clarity instead of tears. She knew how to work within systems. Madison emerged from behind the pillar with renewed purpose, her expression serene despite the storm building behind her eyes. She moved through the reception like she was gliding on rails, accepting more congratulations, posing for photographs, playing the role of the radiant bride while her mind worked through scenarios and calculations. Ryan appeared at her elbow during a brief lull, his presence immediately grounding her. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his artist's intuition picking up on tensions others missed. "You seem different." She looked up at him, really looked at him. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the San Francisco wind, his eyes warm with genuine concern and love. He'd worn his best suit, the one he'd bought specifically for this day, and she could see the small imperfections that marked it as off the rack rather than bespoke. Her family had noticed those imperfections too. "Just overwhelmed," she said, touching his cheek. "It's a lot." He nodded, understanding in the way that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Your family's intense. That's one word for it." She stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture that was both genuine affection and calculated performance. Let them see how happy we are. Let them underestimate what we're capable of. As the evening progressed, Madison found herself studying her family with new eyes. Bradley's nervous energy, the way he avoided direct eye contact when discussing finances, Patricia's calculated warmth, deployed like a weapon when she needed to control a situation, Uncle Richard's casual cruelty disguised as business acumen. They were all so certain of their predictions, so confident in their understanding of human nature and market forces. They had no idea they were about to become part of a much larger experiment. The reception wound down with traditional fanfare, bouquet tossing, final toasts, tearful goodbyes that felt hollow now that Madison understood their true nature. As guests began departing, Madison spotted Theodore Blackwood near the coat check,
his distinguished gray hair and conservative suit making him look like the steadfast family retainer he had been for decades. Madison approached him with the same casual confidence she'd used to discuss quarterly projections. "Theodore, could I have a word? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, a financial matter." His eyebrows rose slightly. Theodore had been managing Wells family investments since before Madison was born, and he'd never known her to be anything but straightforward in business dealings. "Of course, Madison. Congratulations again, by the way. You and Ryan make a lovely couple." Unlike her family's compliments, his felt genuine. Theodore had always treated her ideas with respect, even when she was a teenager with grand schemes and limited understanding of market realities. "Thank you," she said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I have a proposition, something unconventional, but potentially quite interesting from a psychological standpoint." Theodore's expression grew intrigued despite himself. "I'm listening." Madison smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached her eyes. "How familiar are you with behavioral economics, Theodore? Specifically, the way financial incentives can alter human behavior in measurable ways?" "Somewhat familiar," he replied carefully, "though I suspect you're about to educate me further."
It doesn't matter. The point is, Madison's lost her mind. But Patricia was already calculating. $10 million distributed among family members based on betting accuracy. If Madison's marriage imploded on schedule, Patricia would collect the lion's share. If it didn't, she studied the legal language again, noting the precision of the payout structure. Across town, Caroline Wells Thompson was laughing until tears streamed down her face. The letter lay open beside her breakfast dishes, and she couldn't decide if she was more impressed or horrified by her niece's audacity. "Forever," she said aloud to her empty kitchen. "I bet on forever, you brilliant, vindictive child." Unlike her siblings, Caroline understood the psychological warfare Madison had just declared. The girl had turned their casual cruelty into a formal contract, forcing them to confront their own motivations with uncomfortable clarity. She reached for her phone, dialing Madison's number with steady fingers. "Aunt Caroline?" Madison's voice was carefully neutral. "That was masterful, dear. Absolutely masterful." Caroline's tone mixed admiration with concern. "Though, I hope you understand what you've unleashed." "I understand that my family placed bets on my happiness at my own wedding reception." Madison's composure never wavered. "I simply decided to make those bets interesting." "And Ryan? Does he know?" The pause that followed told Caroline everything she needed to know. "I see," Caroline said softly. "Well, for what it's worth, I genuinely hope I win this particular wager. Some things shouldn't be commodified, Madison. Even revenge." After hanging up, Caroline sat in her sun-drenched kitchen, studying the letter that had just made her either very wealthy or completely vindicated in her belief that love could triumph over calculation. Either way, she suspected the cost would be higher than anyone anticipated. The Wells family had always excelled at emotional warfare disguised as concern. Now Madison had given them a financial incentive to turn those weapons on each other. Caroline poured another cup of coffee and settled in to watch her family destroy itself with mathematical precision. Ryan's fingers stilled on his paintbrush as the gallery door chimed, announcing another visitor to his small showing in Soma. He'd been expecting art collectors, maybe a few friends. He hadn't expected his mother-in-law. "Patricia?" he said, forcing warmth into his voice. "What a surprise." "I was in the neighborhood." Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, but cool enough to maintain distance. She moved through the space with practiced grace, her Louboutin heels clicking against the concrete floor as she studied his canvases. Ryan watched her face for genuine reaction, but found only polite interest, the expression she might wear when viewing hotel art. This piece, she paused before his largest work, a turbulent seascape painted during his courtship with Madison, it's quite emotional. "It was inspired by the first time Madison and I went to Half Moon Bay together," Ryan joined her, remembering the day with painful clarity. She said the ocean reminded her of possibility. Her tone carried notes he couldn't identify.
Speaking of Madison, how is married life treating you both? Before Ryan could answer, another voice cut through the gallery's ambient noise. Well, hello there. Ryan turned to find a man in an expensive suit approaching, his smile too confident, his attention too focused on Patricia. Something about the encounter felt orchestrated. Ryan, I'd like you to meet David Ashworth. David, this is Ryan Mitchell, Madison's husband. David extended his hand with the aggressive friendliness of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. The famous artist husband. I've heard so much about you. Ryan's artist instincts, honed by years of reading people for portrait work, caught the subtle interplay between Patricia and David. The way her posture shifted slightly toward him, the practiced timing of his arrival, the calculated nature of this coincidental meeting. David and Madison dated for several years, Patricia continued, as if sharing pleasant family history, before she went through her artistic phase. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach as David chuckled. Patricia, you make it sound like Madison was experimenting with finger painting. David's tone was indulgent, condescending. Though I have to admit I never saw her artistic side. She was always so focused on business, so driven. I suppose marriage changes people. Ryan's grip tightened on his paintbrush. Madison's always appreciated art. It's one of the things that brought us together. Of course, David agreed, but his eyes held a different message. Though I imagine it must be challenging, the financial aspects. Art doesn't exactly provide stability, does it? Madison's always been practical about these things. Patricia watched the exchange with the satisfaction of a chess player executing a long-planned gambit. She'd calculated this perfectly. David's timing, the gallery setting, the emphasis on financial insecurity, all designed to plant seeds of doubt about Ryan's worthiness, his ability to provide the life Madison deserved. Well, she said finally, I should let you get back to your work. David, shall we continue with lunch? As they left together, their easy familiarity on display, Ryan stood alone among his paintings. The gallery suddenly felt smaller, his work more vulnerable, his place in Madison's world less certain. He didn't know about the $10 million, didn't understand the financial incentives driving Patricia's behavior, but he could feel the weight of judgment, the careful placement of doubt like poison in his water supply. At home that evening, Madison noticed his unusual quietness, but attributed it to artistic temperament. She had no idea that her mother had just fired the opening shot in a war Ryan didn't even know he was fighting. The argument started over something trivial. Ryan's paint-stained shirt left on the bedroom chair, but Madison could feel the deeper currents underneath. 2 months into their marriage, the easy intimacy they'd shared was fracturing along invisible fault lines. It's not about the shirt, Ryan said, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. It's about the way that your mother looked at me yesterday, like I was something she'd stepped in. Madison set down her laptop with deliberate precision. They were in their Pacific Heights living room, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the bay, but the beauty felt hollow now. My mother is particular. She doesn't mean anything by it.
Doesn't she? Ryan's artist hands gestured toward the pristine space around them. Everything here costs more than I made in a year before we met. Your family makes sure I know it every time they look at me. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Madison felt her strategic mind wanting to deflect, to analyze, to control the narrative. But underneath that impulse was something rawer, guilt that tasted like copper in her mouth. Ryan, that's not... It is. His voice was quiet now, more dangerous than anger. Your brother keeps offering to help with my art career. Your mother introduces me to your ex-boyfriend. Your uncle asks about my financial planning like I'm a child who can't manage money. Madison's breath caught. She hadn't known about David, hadn't realized the subtle psychological pressure campaign being waged against her husband. The trust fund she'd established suddenly felt less like justice and more like gasoline poured on an already burning house. I didn't know about David, she said carefully. What else don't you know? Ryan's eyes searched her face with the intensity he usually reserved for his canvases. Because lately, I feel like I'm living in a house of mirrors.
Everything's distorted, but I can't figure out what's real anymore." Madison felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Part of her wanted to confess everything: the betting, the trust fund, the elaborate psychological experiment she'd unleashed on her family. But another part, the part that had learned to weaponize information in boardrooms, held back. "My family is complicated." "Complicated," Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's your answer? That's what you give me when I tell you I feel like I'm drowning in their expectations?" The word drowning hit Madison like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on punishing her family for their cruelty that she'd lost sight of the person caught in the crossfire. Ryan's gentle nature, which had drawn her to him originally, was being systematically eroded by forces he couldn't see or understand. "I love you," she said, and meant it with a desperation that surprised her. "I know," his voice softened slightly. "I love you too, but love isn't enough if we can't trust each other. And lately, I feel like there's this wall between us, like you're hiding something that's eating you alive." Madison's throat constricted. He was right, of course. Her secret was poisoning them both, but she couldn't see a way to reveal it without destroying everything else. How could she explain that she'd turned their marriage into a $10 million psychological experiment without proving her family's point about her character? "I need some air," Ryan said finally, reaching for his jacket. "I'm going to walk the bridge." As the door closed behind him, Madison sat alone in their beautiful prison, surrounded by the wealth that was supposed to provide security, but instead felt like chains. Outside, fog was rolling in from the Pacific, obscuring the city in gray uncertainty. She reached for her phone to call Caroline, then stopped. Even her ally in this elaborate game was still family, still complicit in the betting that started everything. Madison Wells had never felt more alone. Ryan's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway when he returned from his walk 3 hours later. Madison was still sitting exactly where she'd left her, but something in her posture had shifted, a kind of collapse, as if she'd been holding herself together through sheer will and had finally let go. "I need to tell you something," she said without looking up, "about my family, about the wedding." Ryan hung his jacket carefully on the back of a chair, his movements deliberate. The fog had cleared during his walk, and with it, some of his anger, but the hurt remained, raw and immediate. "I'm listening." Madison's hands twisted in her lap. For someone who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, the words felt impossibly heavy. "At our reception, they made bets about how long our marriage would last." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Ryan sat down slowly, his artist intuition already assembling pieces of a larger picture. "Bets," he repeated. "My mother said 6 months, Bradley said 2 years. They actually put money on it, like we were horses at a track." Her voice was steady, but Ryan could see the tremor in her fingers. "So you knew, when they were asking about our finances, our plans, whether I was making you happy? You knew why they were really asking?" Madison's composure cracked. "I was so angry, Ryan. They turned our love into a commodity, treated you like you weren't good enough. So you decided to, what, prove them wrong by lying to me for months?" The accusation hit its mark. Madison flinched as if he'd struck her. "I didn't lie. I wanted to handle it myself." "Handle it how? What exactly did you do, Madison?" She met his eyes for the first time since he'd returned, and he saw fear there, not of him, but of losing him. "I made their betting official through Theodore. There's paperwork now, legal documentation. They can't pretend it didn't happen."
Ryan stared at her, pieces of understanding falling into place. The family's increasingly desperate behavior, the calculated encounters, the pressure he'd been feeling, it all made sense now. "You weaponized it," he said, and there was something like admiration in his voice alongside the hurt. "You turned their cruelty back on them. I wanted them to face consequences for betting against us." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "But Madison, don't you see? You're betting against us too. Every time you chose strategy over honesty, every time you manipulated the situation instead of trusting me with the truth, you proved their point. The words hit Madison like physical blows. She'd been so focused on punishing her family that she'd become exactly what they accused her of being, someone who valued winning over genuine connection. "Ryan, please. I need time to think." He was already moving toward the door. "I'm going to stay with Ashley for a few days." "Don't!" The word tore from her throat. "Don't prove them right." Ryan paused, his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back, his expression was gentler, but no less resolved. "Madison, they were never betting on me. They were betting on you, whether you'd choose love or control when it mattered. Right now, I don't know which side of that bet is going to win." The door closed behind him with devastating finality, leaving Madison alone with the consequences of her perfectly executed plan. Ashley Mitchell's Mission District apartment felt like sanctuary after the sterile perfection of Madison's Pacific Heights mansion. Ryan sat on her second-hand couch, nursing his third cup of coffee, while his sister moved around the kitchen with the efficient fury that meant she was processing information. "So let me get this straight. Your wife's family bet on your marriage failing, and instead of telling you, she decided to... what exactly?" "Make it official somehow. Legal documentation through their financial advisor. She said she wanted them to face consequences for..." Ashley paused in her coffee preparation, her expression shifting into the focused intensity Ryan recognized from their childhood. When Ashley decided to protect someone, she became relentless. "Ryan, I need to make some calls." 3 hours later, Ashley returned with a manila folder and an expression that made Ryan's stomach clench. $10 million, she said without preamble, dropping into the chair across from him. "Your wife's not just documenting their bets. She created a trust fund that pays out based on who predicted your marriage duration correctly." Ryan stared at the legal documents Ashley had somehow obtained, the numbers swimming before his eyes. 10 million? "Your mother-in-law gets the full amount if you're divorced by Christmas. Bradley collects if you last exactly 2 years. The aunt, Caroline, wins everything if you stay married past 5 years. Ashley's voice was clinical, but Ryan could hear the anger underneath. "They're not just betting against you anymore. They have financial incentives to actively sabotage or support your marriage." The implications hit him like a physical blow. Every interaction, every seemingly helpful suggestion from Bradley, every calculated cruelty from Patricia, it all had a price tag now. "She turned our marriage into a $10 million psychological experiment," Ryan said quietly. "And the fucked up part," Ashley leaned forward, "she probably thought she was protecting you." Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "By making me a lab rat?" "By giving herself the ultimate weapon against people who hurt her." Ashley's tone softened. "Madison, not evil, Ryan. She's wounded and brilliant and completely out of her depth emotionally. But that doesn't excuse what she's done to you." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to Ashley's window that overlooked the neighborhood where he'd felt most at home in San Francisco. The view was honest. Laundromats and taco trucks and people living real lives without trust funds and psychological warfare. "I need to go back," he said finally. "Ryan, no, you need space to... I need to finish this." He turned back to his sister, and Ashley saw something new in his expression. Not the gentle artist she'd protected for years, but someone harder, more focused. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done from the beginning." Ryan's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Stop being the victim in someone else's story." He gathered the legal documents, his mind already working through possibilities. Madison had taught him something valuable in their months together: how to think strategically, how to anticipate moves and countermoves. She just never expected him to use those lessons against the game she had created.
"I destroyed the best thing in my life trying to prove a point to people whose opinion shouldn't matter," she said quietly. "Ryan was right. You were all betting on me, not him, whether I'd choose love or control." "And what did you choose?" Madison's composure cracked. "Control. Every single time. Even when I told myself I was protecting him, I was really protecting my ego." William studied her tear-stained face. "The question now is whether you can learn to choose differently." "I don't know if I'll get the chance. Ryan won't even see me." Then perhaps, William said gently, you need to prove you've changed to yourself first, before you ask him to trust you again. Outside, San Francisco fog rolled in from the Pacific, obscuring the city in gray uncertainty, while the Wells family faced the long work of rebuilding what money and pride had destroyed. 1 year after their wedding, Madison stood in the same Soma gallery where Ryan had first shown his work, where Patricia had orchestrated that calculated encounter with David. The space looked different now, transformed by success. Ryan's paintings lined the walls, each piece bearing a small placard indicating "Sold," with proceeds benefiting the Ryan Mitchell Arts Foundation. "The irony isn't lost on me," Caroline said, appearing at Madison's elbow with 2 glasses of wine. "Your revenge fund becoming his validation." Madison accepted the wine, but didn't drink. It was never supposed to be about validation. It was supposed to be about justice. And now? Now I understand the difference between justice and healing. Madison's eyes tracked Ryan across the room as he spoke with young artists, his genuine enthusiasm for their work unchanged despite everything. The gallery buzzed with conversation, but Madison felt separate from it, watching from behind glass. She'd attended every one of Ryan's events in the past 6 months, not as his wife, but as a patron of the foundation. Anonymous donations, careful distance, respect for the boundaries he'd established. "He sees you," Caroline observed. Madison looked up to find Ryan's eyes on her across the crowded space. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, memory, a shared understanding of loss. Then he turned back to his conversation, and the moment dissolved. "Mrs. Wells?" A young woman approached, paint still under her fingernails, hope bright in her eyes. "I'm Sarah Chen. My installation is in the corner. The foundation made it possible for me to quit my day job and focus on my art." I smiled genuinely for the first time in months. "Your work is beautiful. What will you do next?" As Sarah explained her plans, Madison felt something shift inside her. This was what the money was supposed to do: create possibility, nurture talent, transform lives, not destroy families or manipulate emotions, but build something meaningful from destruction. The gallery began to thin as the evening wound down. Madison was preparing to leave when she felt a presence beside her. "Thank you," Ryan said quietly, not looking at her directly. "For the foundation, for keeping your distance, for letting me figure out who I am without the family drama. You don't need to thank me for basic decency, though I understand it's been in short supply." They stood in awkward silence, 2 people who'd shared everything, now strangers again. "I've been in therapy," Madison said finally, "individual, not couples, learning to sit with discomfort instead of strategizing my way out of it. That must be difficult for you." "Excruciating," she almost smiled. "Turns out I use my intelligence as armor against feeling vulnerable. Who knew?" Ryan's expression softened slightly. "Madison, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I just want you to know that I understand now what I did to us, how I chose winning over loving, over and over again." Ryan studied her face with the intensity she remembered from the early days, when he'd sketch her while she worked, capturing expressions she didn't know she was making. "I miss you," he said quietly. "I miss us." Madison's voice broke slightly. "But I understand why trust doesn't just reset because someone says they're sorry." Ashley appeared at Ryan's shoulder, her presence protective but not hostile. Madison had learned to read the sisters' dynamic, Ashley's fierce loyalty tempered by fairness. The foundation raised $200,000 tonight. Sarah Chen's installation sold to a private collector. "That's wonderful," Madison said, meaning it. "Would you—" Ryan hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Just coffee, just talking." Madison felt her heart stutter, but forced herself to remain calm. "I'd like that. When you're ready." "I'm not ready," Ryan said honestly, "but I think I might be willing to try being not ready together."
As Madison walked into the San Francisco night, fog rolling in from the Pacific, she understood that some bridges, once burned, required entirely new foundations. Love wasn't enough to rebuild trust, but perhaps, with patience and genuine change, it might be enough to begin again. The question no longer was whether love could survive being transactional. It was whether two wounded people could learn to love without keeping score. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
Ryan, Ashley called as he reached the door. Be careful. People with that much money don't like losing control. Then they shouldn't have bet against someone with nothing left to lose. The door closed behind him, leaving Ashley alone with the unsettling certainty that the Wells family was about to discover they'd underestimated both Mitchell siblings. The Wells family dinner was supposed to be a celebration of William's 80th birthday, but the tension in the Nob Hill Mansion's dining room felt more like a wake. 6 months exactly since the wedding, and Patricia's careful calculations hung over the table like storm clouds. Madison picked at her salmon, hyper-aware of every glance, every pause in conversation. Ryan had returned home 3 days ago without explanation. His demeanor shifted into something she couldn't read. He'd been polite, even affectionate, but there was a watchfulness in his eyes that made her skin crawl. "Ryan," Patricia said, her voice honey-smooth, "you seem quieter than usual tonight." "Just thinking about time," Ryan replied, cutting his meat with deliberate precision. "How quickly 6 months can pass. How much can change." Bradley's fork clinked against his plate. Madison caught the nervous energy radiating from her brother, the way his eyes kept darting to Patricia as if seeking approval. "Speaking of change," Patricia continued, "I hope you know how much we've all come to care for you, despite any initial reservations." "Reservations," Ryan repeated softly. "Interesting word choice." Madison felt ice forming in her veins. Something was wrong. Ryan never played word games, never engaged in the subtle verbal warfare that was her family's specialty. "Actually," Ryan said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I've been meaning to share something with you all." He placed a small recording device on the table. Patricia's face went ashen. "Ryan, what?" Madison started. "Last week, your mother made me an interesting proposition. She offered to help me disappear from your life, quietly, with financial compensation for my discretion." The silence that followed was deafening. William's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Caroline's wine glass froze at her lips. Bradley looked like he might vomit. "She also mentioned something fascinating about a trust fund. $10 million, to be exact." Madison's world tilted sideways. "Ryan, how did you—" "Ashley's good at research." He pressed play on the device. Patricia's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "Madison deserves better than a struggling artist who can't provide for her properly. Think of it as early retirement." "You recorded me," Patricia whispered, her composure finally cracking. "I learned from the best," Ryan said, looking directly at Madison. "Turns out strategic thinking isn't that complicated once you understand the game." Madison stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for the first time in months. The gentle artist was still there, but underneath was something harder, someone who had been forged in the crucible of her family's manipulation. "The trust fund," William said quietly. "Madison, is this true?" Madison's carefully constructed world began to collapse around her. "Grandfather, I can explain." $10 million, Caroline breathed. "You actually did it." Ryan stood slowly, pocketing the recorder. "The 6-month mark is tomorrow. I thought everyone should know exactly what they're celebrating." He walked toward the door, leaving behind a family finally forced to confront the true cost of their casual cruelty. Theodore Blackwood's office felt like a confessional as Madison signed the dissolution papers, her signature ending the most ethically complex arrangement of his career. The trust fund that had consumed her family for 6 months was being dismantled with clinical efficiency.
The money goes to the Ryan Mitchell Arts Foundation, Madison said, her voice hollow, as originally specified if no predictions proved accurate. And your family's reactions? Theodore asked gently. Varied. Madison's laugh held no humor. Bradley's in rehab for gambling addiction. Mother's started therapy, though I suspect it's more about damage control than genuine change. Caroline says she's proud of me for finally choosing love over revenge. What she didn't say was that Ryan had moved back to Ashley's apartment, that he spoke to her only through lawyers now, that her grand gesture of dissolving the trust fund felt meaningless when delivered to an empty house. 3 blocks away, Ryan sat across from Dr. Elena Santos, their couples therapist, alone, for the 3rd consecutive session. She keeps asking me to come back, he said, studying his hands. Says she's learned from her mistakes, that she dissolved the trust fund to prove she chooses us over her revenge. But you don't believe her. I believe she's sorry. I believe she loves me, Ryan's voice was tired. But I don't trust her judgment anymore. When things got difficult, she chose manipulation over honesty. What happens the next time her family hurts us? Dr. Santos nodded. Trust rebuilds slowly. What would you need to see from Madison to even consider reconciliation? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Proof that she can be vulnerable without it being strategic, that she can choose our relationship over being right. At the Wells mansion, William was revising his will with grim satisfaction. The trust fund revelation had clarified his family's priorities with devastating precision. Caroline would inherit the bulk of his estate. She alone had shown integrity throughout the ordeal. Grandfather Madison said, standing in his study doorway, "May I speak with you?" William looked up from his papers, seeing his granddaughter clearly for the first time in years. The calculating strategist was gone, replaced by someone fragile and uncertain.